Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about clay bar paint surface preparation. On this particular vehicle, I am removing some overspray paint that happened on this vehicle. This is a new housing complex and they're still building houses all around this customer's home, and the paint they're doing next door or down the street drifted onto this vehicle. And so I am removing that paint overspray using the clay bar process. If this vehicle had not been oversprayed with paint and I was called to detail it, I would generally still do the same exact process, only less aggressively. This particular clay bar session took about 2 to 3 hours. A typical clay bar session on just a normal car with light to medium contaminants but no overspray, probably more like an hour up to 2 hours, just depends. Basically, what you see here is just me going over every surface, starting at the top and working my way down is generally the rule. I'm also getting the B-pillar between the two doors. I'm also doing all the glass, and I'm also doing behind the door handles. Generally, when I'm doing it, I typically take the top half of the car and I'll go from front to back. And then after everything's done that way on both sides, I'll go down and do a final lower section from front to back on both sides, down below that trim line that's at the middle of that door. And the reason I do that is because I feel like there's so much more contaminants from road debris and other stuff. I try to stay out of those lower areas until I'm all the way done, for two reasons. One, I don't want my clay to get really contaminated, but also when you're doing the side of vehicles, and especially those low areas, it's more common that you're going to have a chance of losing your clay, having it hit something dry or catch an edge and fall out of your hand and end up on the ground. And if that happens, that piece of clay is now trash. And since clay is not very cheap, it's about 20 bucks a pack, I think, which I break in half. So I get 2 pieces for 20 bucks or so. It's fairly expensive, so I try not to drop it. If I do, it's immediately trashed. You can reuse a piece of clay that's not been dropped, typically for quite a while. I would say we get 5 to 10 cars out of a piece of clay if it's never dropped. And basically every section you do, you just want to rework that piece of clay, fold it over on itself several times, and then flatten it back down to a working piece of clay. So a nice, Alright, here is some major fallout, and then some other vehicles that we've also clay barred and then applied sealant to. These are just different vehicles we do on a regular basis. Some have overspray, some do not. Alright, so here I am on the other side, and this time I am starting on the roof section, and I want you to notice a couple things. You look at the way my body's positioned, you might think, wow, what the heck is he doing? I'm arching my body and trying to keep it as far away from the vehicle as possible, my legs and my knees, because you don't want to drag your knees or anything on your clothes across that paint or those. So, why should you clay bar your vehicle's paint? Number one, there are contaminants that get on vehicle paint out there. Whether you can see them or not, doesn't matter, they're there. If you lightly run your hand across a dry, relatively clean paint surface, you can hear and feel the roughness on your paint. That's contaminants. If it feels slick, glossy, and smooth, then there's less contaminants. but just know that there are. One neat little trick you can do is if you have a piece of cellophane, which is like the plastic that comes on like a cigarette pack, for instance, you can put that over your fingers and then lightly rub it across the paint surface. It's almost like having a magnifying glass on your hand. You can actually feel the tiny particles of contaminants that are on your paint. It's a neat trick, so if you ever want to check that out or show a customer that, it's a great way to demonstrate by feel the surface paint contamination. Do that and then clay bar a section of paint, dry it off, and go back over it the same way, and you'll feel an amazing difference. The other thing is you can just hear contaminants on the paint. If you're to take a dry, clean car and rub your hand lightly across it, you'll hear the scratchiness or roughness to the paint, and you can feel it. So anyway, definitely clay bar every car that you can. And then after, you're obviously going to either wax or apply a sealant or some other type of coating. We typically apply a polymer style paint sealant to every vehicle we do, just because we found that it's the best out there. Right here I'm just showing the discoloration in the clay from the overspray paint I'm removing, and I apologize, it's not that very good of a lighting setup and I didn't realize that at the time. But basically your clay is going to turn colors whether you're getting overspray off or just regular contaminants. Typically if you are not removing overspray and you've just got a heavily contaminated car, a lot of the time, probably 99% of the time, your clay bar, if it's white, will turn kind of a rust color, and that is from fallout, which is micro iron particles that are literally rusting on your paint. Alright, so I'm just kind of speeding up the process here. You kind of get the idea by now. Basically, as far as technique goes, I generally just try and be real comfortable with body positioning, making sure that I'm getting a good overlapping, either up and down or side to side, depending on what surface I'm working, and getting complete coverage. Generally, if you've got a body line, you want to travel in the direction of that body line to help not drop your clay or bump into edges and things and get the clay sticking in those gaps and cracks and crevices. Just always travel the direction of a line. That'll help you to not drop your clay and also not create extra work for yourself. The other thing is always make sure your surface is nice and wet. If you work in an area that is dry, especially if you're working outside in the sun and things dry up, a lot of times your clay will hit those drier areas or dry areas and it'll fall out of your hand because you'll bump into it, and you've got to kind of have a light touch on the clay in general, and just bumping into those dry areas sometimes can make it kind of rip it away out of your hand. I think that's about it. If you got any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them, and please be sure to like and subscribe to the video as well. Thanks for watching. Okay, this is just a quick walk around showing that I've got the polymer sealant buffed onto the paint at this point. And if you want to see that process of applying a paint sealant using a dual action polisher, please watch this other video. Alright, and finally just doing a little speeded up shot of me removing the polymer sealant that I've applied. And then after this, I'll just do a quick walk around showing the finished product. Alright, so a couple issues that we took care of, in addition to the main reason we were there, which was paint overspray, is there was a decent scratch right here on this driver's side door near that body line. Clay barring it, I actually took out 99% of it, and then the polymer sealant took out the last remaining little bit of the scratch. The other thing was the hood had a pretty fair amount of water spotting prior to us doing this work,